Hey everyone, check this out. We're on a little bit of a rotation, bias, tear, rotation, obsession, kick. We're on the kick. So we see a lot of people wince, complain, talk about that there's not enough rotation programming right, into the language. But one of the things that we want to point out is how do you pick up rotation besides lay on your back, throw your legs over, crank back? Because I have a lot of very stiff athletes in the hips, I know you do too, who make up all of their rotation in their lumbar, right? And what sometimes I see in the internet is people working on rotation and they're blocking themselves, getting crazy amounts of blocked rotation and just nothing else is moving except the parts that can move, right? Which for us is like, okay, that may or may not ever be a problem, but it doesn't, you get reinforced mechanics in positions that, or in the parts that move, and it doesn't fix the parts that don't move.
100%.
Right. So a couple of ways to think about this, because it's easy to see, hey, I'm in the shape, coach, right? And it doesn't matter how you got there. Meanwhile, you have one vertebra that's doing all the work, right?
Very mobile, one joint.
Very mobile, one joint.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple things that we want to pick up on. So usually, for example, in our ready state assessment, we don't have a rotation assessment because it's difficult to quantify, especially in the context of it's not really a real movement. So for example, if most assessments, Diane's sitting at the edge, she crosses her arms, this locks her thoracic spine in, and she rotates, right? And you've heard us talk about this before, so we can sort of say, hey, is this better, same, worse? She rotates the other direction. There are normative values here, but because she's crossing so many joints, again, this doesn't necessarily tell me what's rotating, what's not rotating. If you're a therapist, certainly mobilizing that, is a great retest. But when we start to sort of get a little bit more nuanced about that, how much rotation do you do sitting?
Rotation do I do sitting?
Like you're looking over your shoulder maybe when you drive, right? There's not a lot of rotation that's done mechanically to end range sitting. That's our point.
I was like,
right?
wait,
I don't, should I be? You throw the ball at me while I'm sitting here? So even to appreciate, hey, when we have this conversation about the neck, it's not just the neck sits, shoulders, whole T-spine works. But what I want you to appreciate in this moment is that there are a couple big opportunities to improve this. One of the first opportunities, if you just rotate a little bit, is to pick up the shoulder, because we aren't just looking at her ability. So if Diane, we're starting with the assumption that if Diane has a relatively midline spine, a spine that has access and it's organized to its best, doesn't have a lot of flexion, doesn't have a lot of extension in here, this mid-range spine is going to have the most rotation, right? So already, if I have Diane slump a little bit, just let it go, oh, it feels so good, then rotate slumped, right? She's got a curve and she's not going to get, if I have her sit up taller or sit up where she can take a big breath, whatever that meant. And I didn't even say sit up straight, I just said be taller, now rotate. It's improved and we didn't do anything. So we changed her rotational capacity by theoretically telling her to be in a better position or a position that felt taller for her. So a lot of times we're measuring this over multiple joint systems. And ultimately, we don't really care about what's happening just here. We care about, hey, Di, can you reach back and grab this football? Right? And that was initiated with this shoulder. So if we see athletes who are stiff in terms of their shoulder extension, right? She's got to turn and get this shoulder back. If she is missing this shoulder extension here, then she's trapped. That the shoulder is here, and then she's got to make up for that around the rest of the system. Which is why in part of our concept, if we're going to have a normal shoulder, we need overhead and front rack and hang and shoulder extension. And what we're looking at is when we're trying to solve complex problems around the neck and shoulder, if you see decreased or loss of function in this big prime engine, right? Spine is the first engine, this is the secondary engine, the prime engine though, then you can't really understand completely what the concept is. This is why you can just work on this joint, work on this joint. Meanwhile, the rest of this system isn't really functioning very well. So keep in mind that her ability to extend the shoulder and rotate, right? That's a huge component to her overall quality of rotation. And that's why we do things like ball tosses, and you might even see Russian twists in there, or athletes throwing the ball back and forth. But it's an easy way to pick up a ton of rotation is to improve the relationship of scapula to body. Because watch what happens when I yank her scapula back. She doesn't even have to rotate that far. That shoulder opens up. and we pick up hidden rotation. So again, we're talking about ways or blind spots in your rotational assessment. The other big one, come stand up for us, is the idea that most of us are rotating from standing. That's when it matters most, right? And so notice that if Diane, who has excellent internal rotation of her hip, which I'll show you in a second, but if she rotates over her shoulder, go ahead and rotate away, look at how much rotation happens here, not here. This hip is externally rotating. Most of us have enough external rotation. The hip she's closing to has a high demand of internal rotation. Our friends at Pivotal Coaching do a drill where they just have athletes stand and tip back and forth. And all they're doing is just trying to remind their athletes how to rotate through that hip, right? That rotation actually begins at the foot. So if you have a collapsed arch, knees in, what happens to your rotation here?
Right, it gets closed off.
Gets closed off. If you can't maintain a stable system and rotate internally, because remember, the body is rotating on the femur. In this case, I have relative internal rotation of the femur. Then that's another block. So if Diane lays down, just lay on your stomach for me.
Oh, stomach.
Stomach, you got it.
Other stomach.
Other stomach. Right? It's quickly easy to pick up, does she have some internal rotation or not? So this leg is in relatively the same position, and this is internal rotation. Look, she's got massive amounts of rotation. So we are always assessing more rotation with the hip as an extension. But a quick pickup is, hey, look, you should see a ton of wag back and forth in this. And if you're not seeing this rotation happen from the trunk, starting at the foot, working its way up the hip, and potentially limited here, and you're obsessed with T-spineness, you may be missing out on components of your rotation. So thanks, Di. The idea here is, boy, we better be thinking in terms of this whole chain and looking at the whole chain. And the good news is if you just work on your rotation at your hip, it'll improve your rotation. If you work on your shoulder extension, it'll improve your rotation. If you actually do things like rotate, that will also improve your rotation. So as soon as you jump into a yoga class and you're like, holy moly, I can't get my scat back, that's the limiter to my rotation, you're gonna see why Pilates was on it, why all the track athletes are on it, why people are all about it. You've gotta be thinking about the rotation in your programming, and keep in mind that while it may not be obvious that full ankle range of motion matters and full hip range of motion matters, it matters. So sitting down and watch someone jam through their thoracic spine, sort of an incomplete story.
100%.